the new developments in the Karen Read murder trial.
This has been a wild turn of events.
I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen anything like this. This case never ceases to amaze me.
It's a spectacle, that's for sure.
It was a hung jury, so no verdict, no real ending to this case.
Karen Read was back in court where a date was set for her to be tried once again.
There are a lot of issues in this case.
Proctor was improperly searching Karen Read's cell phone for nude photos.
Michael Proctor, the lead investigator,
relieved of his duties.
It's always the theories that each side will put forth for a jury to decide which one is more believable.
Karen Read was drunk and angry and hit and killed John O'Keefe when she gunned it in the snowstorm.
Karen, did you ever say I hit him?
I did not.
There are more people here at the beginning of this than at the beginning of Johnny Depp's trial.
We're not concerned about any of the witnesses. None of the Commonwealth's witnesses are concerning us.
and once again, there was drama outside court.
There is a whole new set of legal troubles for Karen Read. She is now facing a wrongful death lawsuit.
The lawsuit alleges that Karen Read was drunk and reckless when she hit John O'Keefe.
It's not just Read being sued here. The family also suing the two Canton bars from that night.
The two bars are liable for over-serving her.
The FBI is investigating an investigation of a murder. That never, ever happens.
At this point, multiple jurors have been reaching out to both sides, saying that they are certain Karen Read is not a killer.
I did not kill John O'Keefe. I've never harmed a hair on John O'Keefe's head.
We're looking at arm injuries with scratches. We're not looking at tire tracks.
There are 17 jurors, and they're coming and going with a police escort.
The investigation wasn't thorough.
This can't be good for the prosecution moving forward.
I just hope justice is served for either one, whatever it is, you know.
The fate of her life is not in her hands anymore. It's not in the hands of her attorneys. It's not in the hands of the prosecutor. It's in the hands of the jury now.
Free Karen Read! Free Karen Read! Free Karen Read! Free Karen Read! Free Karen Read!
When I decided to do a full season of this podcast directly focused on Canton, I knew that I wanted to do a deep dive because it felt like something was off. Things weren't adding up, and I wanted to dig as much as I could to try to get a full picture of what's going on in Canton, Massachusetts. As things progressed, it seems like the story has stretched outward to include all of these other stories within the story. Some of the same people, some of the same places, but it seems like the death of Officer John O'Keefe has triggered multiple other situations. A national spotlight has now been placed directly on Canton, and there are now eyes and attention on situations that were previously able to slip under the radar undetected. There's also a new cast of characters that has become active on the perimeter of this case, whether it's through following the trial or protesting or just being active on social media. And somewhere along the line, many of them have gone from watching what's happening to becoming part of the story. I've tried to stay out of the perimeter drama as much as possible, which isn't easy because it seems to be everywhere, and some of the participants are relentless and brutal. But when the spectators become the players, it becomes impossible to report on this case without including what's happening around it with the people involved. I have some updates to share with you on the Karen Read murder trial, the appeal, and the wrongful death civil suit. And we'll go through those updates later in this episode. First, I want to take a look at some of the other issues associated with this case that have been making huge waves recently. Let's start with the Canton police audit that I mentioned in the previous episode. We've discussed before that the town voted in a special election last year to do an audit of the police department after backlash from the investigation into John O'Keefe's death, as well as the investigation into Sandra Birchmore's death, among other issues. A town meeting was held recently to have the 5 members of the Canton Police Audit Committee discuss the services that needed to be done so that they could decide on a firm to conduct the audit. But things didn't go as planned, and the disagreements led to heated exchanges, rising tensions, shouting matches, and the police being called. The Police Audit Committee is comprised of 5 members, and there has already been some concern with some of those members having conflicts of interest that will prevent the audit from being done properly. Now remember, the whole point of this is to have an outside party come in and audit the police department so that any necessary changes can be made, issues can be addressed, and the community can begin to have trust in their law enforcement again. But it doesn't really seem like everyone is on board, and some of the members, including the chairman, seem to have different goals or priorities than some of the others. Chairman Bob McCarthy has clashed quite aggressively with residents at the meetings as well as other committee members. So here's how the board is set up. There are only 2 members that were nominated by the people who petitioned to actually have the audit done, and that's David Clough and Kathleen Howley. So those 2 are all in on this. They want the audit done and they want it done right. They see the importance of what it means to the police department and especially to the community and the residents. But there are the other 3 members, and there seems to be a pretty major disconnect between the 2 sides. Chairman Bob appointed John Kelly, who is a retired state police colonel, and Dr. Dan Muse, who has provided training to Canton Police Department. Now, that raised some concerns with them having a conflict of interest and relationships with Canton Police Department. Both Dr. Muse and John Kelly have addressed this and said that they have no conflict. Now, I can't say if they do or they don't, but I will tell you that watching this meeting, it was very clear that these 5 members of the committee are not on the same page. As they're talking about the different firms that are putting in bids to do the audit, they mentioned that some of the firms are asking questions and asking about digital communication. David, who is one of the 2 that was nominated by the pro-audit people, tries to discuss the importance of getting the information that is requested in a timely manner to avoid inflating the price. Chairman Bob doesn't want to hear it. Chairman Bob doesn't seem like he wants to hear much of anything from anyone, really. And after David makes his argument about why it matters, Chairman Bob literally just says no and shuts it down. Then the first taste of chaos ensues.
So I would move to update these, provide the digital information upon request.
No. You're taking the place of a legal. You don't have a degree. You're not protecting the town, and you don't even know if that's possible. So it has to be broad because we don't know what they're going to ask or when they're going to ask.
Now you're attacking my character.
No, that's a lawyer is what I said.
You said I don't have a degree. So
as a lawyer, that's what I said, and that's what I meant. Did you misunderstand me?
Is this, Mr. Chair, this is not like a way to talk to people in a public space, screaming and yelling at people's faces like that. This is highly irregular.
Oh, for somebody like you, that's...
For somebody like me, again, you're attacking my character. This is
not your character.
This is very disrespectful.
You're not a lawyer, are you?
You cannot treat me like this.
You have a legal degree.
Sir, you cannot treat me like this. I don't have a legal degree, but I have common sense. And we know that our town attorney and other officials in the room and yourself are here to obstruct and cover for murders.
Whoa. So you basically...
Public comment.
Do we have a code of conduct in the town of Canton? Because you sure as heck don't understand.
We don't. And
but we do.
And this wouldn't be a way to conduct a meeting by a chair if we actually did have a code of conduct.
A good way to conduct the meeting.
Screaming and yelling at us.
The one who's asking to change town council's opinion, who has a legal degree, from somebody who doesn't have a legal degree. And now is upset because I'm questioning the fact that he doesn't have a legal degree.
Bob, it's how you question.
It doesn't mean...
You're yelling at him, and you tell us you're an expert in Robert's Rules of Law.
No, I didn't say I was an expert. I said I know it. Don't put words in my mouth.
I'm sure you know that decorum and respect run all through Robert's Rules, and you were shouting at Dave, and you were treating him disrespectfully.
No, I really wasn't. I was treating him as it should be. Let's move on and let's get this done.
It doesn't get any better from here. Pro-audit Kathleen says that she disagrees with their perspective that it just needs to get done. She wants a thorough and independent audit. Her saying that she disagrees triggers Chairman Bob, who then tells her that she's biased.
Well, we disagree with you. We think you're very
this,
biased when it comes to this. So
no, by bias you mean opinionated, right?
No, I mean biased.
Biased.
I mean, you've gone after the police chief and others and so forth, so biased.
The budget was then debated, since some believed that $200,000 would not be enough to have a national firm conduct the audit. But the chairman, Bob, maintained that there would be no signing of any contracts for any bids that came in over the cost, calling it a dead issue. When the two pro-audit members brought up supplemental funding, Chairman Bob didn't seem like he wanted to hear it. But David pointed out that every other project that Chairman Bob has worked on all had supplemental funding. And then he begins to list them one by one. He points out that given all that, spending $200,000 to restore trust in the community is a small price. Apparently, Chairman Bob was okay with the audit if the select board was doing it. But the select board being in charge of it kind of defeats the purpose. When Kathleen points that out, Chairman Bob takes it personally.
That would be like having the fox edit the hen house.
I don't understand that.
Because the select board are the police commissioners of the town.
Do you trust anybody?
I certainly do. And once again, you're personalizing this.
Well, I think you are by the previous comment.
No, those were public comments that you made and you were very proud to make. You were completely
and you
biased.
cherry-picked what I said. I still have the speech if you
Completely
like.
biased. It's on video. I hope people go and look it up.
They tell Chairman Bob that he's setting a nasty tone for the meeting and the town, and they agree to take a 5-minute break so that everyone can cool the temperature a little.
And you're going to be on NBC
Make a motion.
yelling at all this. No.
Room's cool down.
This is, at least you're not screaming and screaming at the audience as you have at other audit meetings. So that's a little bit of an improvement.
After the break, Chairman Bob basically tried to immediately motion for votes to get the items all accepted without any more discussion. That's a bit of a problem. They're there to discuss these things, and since there are clearly 3 on one side and 2 on the other, if he motions to just accept everything and move on without letting the other side be heard, it violates the open meeting law. David and Kathleen are caught off guard a little bit with this whole thing and ask them if they met during that 5-minute break, which also violates the open meeting law. Things get really heated, and David tells Chairman Bob, Dr. Muse, and John Kelly that they are obstructing the cover of murderers in this town. Muse responds, "How dare you even say that?"
What did you vote?
You're obstructing the cover for murderers in this town. All 3 of you.
You
should all be
how
ashamed.
dare you even say that? You do not know if they were murderers. If there is even a
FBI
case,
comes in.
the FBI did not come in and say that
FBI
anybody,
has come
any
in.
Canton police officer
Have you watched?
is a murderer. Yes, I have watched.
Was murdered.
Number 1. Number 2, they are innocent till proven guilty.
They haven't been charged with anything. That's what that protects and attaches.
You're voting.
You are stating I'm covering for a murderer.
What was your vote? Abstain? Yes, no, abstain.
What's the question? We haven't even had the discussion part. You violated Robert's rules, and we
got to vote on this.
Usually you have it under Robert's rules of orders. You have a discussion before you have a vote.
Discussion.
We didn't have a discussion.
Rita Lombardi was present and began to speak, but Chairman Bob was quick to reprimand her. She tells him that he can call the police on her. Chairman Bob says he would love to.
See the questions and see the answers, or are you just going to just shut us all down?
You're out of order because I recognize you. Please leave. Please leave.
Wackham Randy doesn't have to leave.
I am not going to.
Come on.
So call the police on me if you
I would love to.
David,
then go for it. Go ahead.
let's go through each
Hit it,
question.
Randy. Hit it,
We'll
Randy.
see you
I'm
all
tired of this. We come here.
Let's go
and
through
we
each
try to
question.
work with you, and all you're doing is yelling at people.
The public deserves to know what the questions are, and you're withholding.
Please have the police come here and escort her out.
When Chairman Bob asks for police to come escort Rita out, David says that they also need to escort Mr. Scollins out since he was talking out of turn as well. But he's on Chairman Bob's side, so Chairman Bob didn't scold him.
Escort her out.
I would like Mr. Scollins escorted out for speaking out of turn as well.
No.
Yes.
No, that's my call, not yours.
It's not your call because
No. And
you're covering for him.
do you have a vote to?
Randy's calling the police.
I haven't even had the discussion.
They try to discuss things, and it does not go well. David motions to remove Bob from chair. It's once again a vote of 2 to 3, which seems like this is how the whole thing was designed. They discuss Sandra Birchmore's investigation, and the anti-audit side defends Canton police. They defend Canton police for the solo cups and the snowblower and everything else, and basically just give the impression that all is good in Canton, and this is just a formality. It's a very frustrating thing to watch. Chairman Bob at some point begins yelling at Rita again, telling her to leave. Kathleen tries to get things back on track and points out that Canton Police's involvement in the case is an issue, correcting Dr. Muse. But then police arrive to escort Rita out, and everything stops again. Rita leaves, and they get Scollins to leave, and then they try to do some voting on the issues. Shocker, everything is 3-2, and every time there's a 3-2 vote, Chairman Bob gloats. There's also a few women who try to ask questions, and they are immediately reprimanded and shut down by Chairman Bob. But when a man asks a question, he listens and even answers. Kathleen points this out. Later on in the meeting, it's brought up that Sandra Birchmore's name in the report is listed as Sarah, and a resident asked for it to be changed. It should have been a simple thing, but like with everything else, it seemed like there was some attitude behind it. That led to the resident who brought it up saying this.
Also, can I just take 1 minute? Because I feel like this is really the time, and I've been standing here for a really long time. And I think that look that I just saw on the chair of the police audit's face is the moment where I can't sit down any longer. Her name's incorrect in this document. She was a Canton resident. She was pregnant. She was murdered in this town. And watching a town vote in a democratic way, audit the police, whatever that may be, wherever I might have fallen on that vote, actually doesn't matter. Because what I'm seeing here is a committee that was formed as a result of that vote not behave in a way that I think the majority of people wanted it to behave. So I understand the different issues on there. And in fact, there may have been things that I've agreed with one side over the other. But the fact that a town voted for a committee to create an audit, and that has now looks like this, it's not what I voted for. I voted for a collaborative committee to work on this. And I'm not saying you need to agree on every detail, but when a woman who was murdered, his name is incorrect in a document that you're all looking at, to watch that smug look on your face, Bob, and laugh after that correction was made, it gets me to my core to a point that it's hard to even speak. So I just want to be sure that we understand that changing her name to be correct and adding the fact that she was pregnant is something that we can at least agree on.
Chairman Bob comes off as defensive, aggressive, hostile, arrogant, and quite frankly, rude. He doesn't let anyone speak unless he agrees with them. He interrupts them, talks over them, and is entirely closed to anyone else's thoughts or opinions. I can't believe he's the chairman. But then again, it's Canton. When the meeting is open to public comment, this is the first comment.
I am embarrassed for this town being represented by you as a chairman of this committee. You have tried to kneecap this audit since it started. It's obvious that you're a chauvinist. You treat women with disrespect. You have no respect for the members of this community. This town voted for an audit. They procured $200,000, and they were told by the finance committee that if the cost overage was going to be more than $200,000, that the select board would use money from the mitigation funds. You have tried to kneecap the scope of this audit. You are an embarrassment, and your two counterparts that you have over here with you are in on the whole gig too, okay? People see what the hell is going on around here. You should be embarrassed. I feel bad for you. I can only imagine what your family life is like by the way that you talk to people. And that's all I have to say. And to the residents of Canton, God help us.
Bob then makes a motion to adjourn, but there's two more speakers. One isn't a Canton resident, but she says that she's a public safety consultant. She spends about 5 minutes talking, and she tells the committee that it's great that they are doing all of this in a public forum, but it's highly unusual the way that they're going about it. It's normal protocol to have an agency consult on the scope of what the investigation is going to be, and she says that way that they're going about this is going to make it really hard to get quality vendors that this town really needs for this audit. She makes a lot of sense, but will they listen? Finally, the last speaker simply said this.
I just want to say that I had serious concerns that this audit committee was going to be successful, that this audit was really going to do what the citizens wanted. And the only thing I can say to that right now after this is what a joke.
And that sums it up. The committee's goal is to select a firm by the end of October and then start the audit in November. A final report and presentation are scheduled for spring. It's hard to believe that the time frame that they have in mind is going to be enough to really do this the right way. I truly hope for the town's sake that they are able to do it properly and thoroughly, and really help this community begin to trust and heal. We'll be right back after this. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Think of a time recently when you didn't feel like you could be your full self, like you were hiding behind a mask. October is the season for wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we wear a mask and hide more often than we want to. At work, in social settings, around our family. Therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself, so you can take off the mask. Because masks should be for Halloween fun, not for our emotions. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries in your life. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, so it's designed to be convenient and flexible, and you can suit it to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time, and there's no additional charge for that. So take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/juror today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/juror. We also have an update on the Sandra Birchmore saga. Matthew Farwell, who is charged with the murder of Sandra, filed a motion to waive his detention hearing that was scheduled for September 12th, agreeing to voluntary detention. His twin brother, William Farwell, had his certification officially and voluntarily permanently revoked by the Massachusetts Post Commission for his participation in and knowledge of inappropriate sexual relationships with Sandra between himself and his brother. The federal investigation into Sandra's death is ongoing, and we are all eagerly awaiting updates. Farwell has been charged, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions, especially about the investigation and how this has been ignored for so long. In an affidavit from an FBI special agent investigating Sandra's death, we learned that Dr. William Smock was hired as an expert to assist in the federal investigation. And he made several conclusions that contradicted the suicide ruling from the medical examiner. Dr. Smock is known for his research in strangulation, and he reviewed crime scene photos, the autopsy, and the medical examiner's report. He believed that the bone in the neck that was fractured wasn't consistent with how Sandra was seated on the floor, but it was more consistent with strangulation assaults. The skin that was missing from parts of her nose, he says, are also consistent with cases of suffocation because they can be caused by the victim moving their head back and forth while attempting to breathe. The broken necklace where the chain was snapped is also, he says, a sign of a struggle. A prominent forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, came to this same conclusion in June of this year after being hired by Sandra's family to look into her death. Dr. Baden is a former chief medical examiner in New York City and has been involved with some of the nation's most high-profile cases, including the government's reinvestigations into Martin Luther King Jr.'s death and President John F. Kennedy's assassination, plus the cases of O.J. Simpson, Kobe Bryant, Robert Blake, just to name a few. plus worldwide high-profile deaths, even the remains of a Russian czar and multiple Iraq-related court-martials in the U.S. and Baghdad. He's performed more than 20,000 autopsies in his 45 years as a medical examiner. So when Dr. Baden speaks, I tend to listen. And it's no surprise that another well-respected expert has come to the same conclusions. The FBI agents investigating Sandra's death met with Dr. Mindy J. Hull on August 16th, just 9 days before Farwell was arrested for Sandra's murder. Dr. Hull was the medical examiner that determined Sandra died from asphyxiation by hanging and ruled it a suicide. The agents met with her for several hours, informing her that their investigation has led to a different conclusion. Ted Daniel from Boston 25 News obtained the visitor's log from August 16th, and it shows that Dr. Smock accompanied the FBI on this visit to Dr. Hull. Those determinations by the medical examiner are generally made from the autopsy as well as any additional information that's provided by the district attorney's office and law enforcement. It would be really interesting to know what all the medical examiner knew or was told at the time that she ruled this a suicide. Let's get into some of the updates for Karen Reed. In a previous episode, I mentioned the wrongful death suit against Karen Reed and C.F. McCarthy's and Waterfall Bar and Grill. It was filed by the O'Keefe family. C.F. McCarthy's filed their response, denying all allegations and demanding a jury trial, if not dismissal of the suit along with compensation for their legal fees. Waterfall Bar and Grill has now also filed their response, which was much like that of C.F. McCarthy's. They deny all allegations of wrongdoing. Karen's attorneys have filed a motion to delay the trial on the lawsuit until after her criminal trial, which as of now is still scheduled for January 27th. The motion states that proceeding with the civil action at this time, as the criminal action is also going on, will adversely affect Karen's Fifth Amendment rights and her ability to vigorously defend herself from criminal prosecution. They argue that a balance of the potential burden and prejudicial effects weigh in favor of a stay, just a brief delay of the proceedings. Paul O'Keefe's attorney filed an opposition to Karen's motion to delay and fired back with a hint of bitterness, stating that in certain cases they would agree. But here, Karen consistently and voluntarily disregards her Fifth Amendment privilege as she attempts to craft her own narrative and poison the jury pool for both her criminal and civil cases. Karen has done multiple interviews and will be the subject of a 2-hour Dateline episode this week. Paul O'Keefe's attorney says in light of her open willingness to speak publicly, Karen's reliance on Fifth Amendment right to silence appears to be less about avoiding self-incrimination and more about controlling the narrative to suit her interest. The opposition goes on to say that 8 of the 12 jurors believed Karen was guilty of OUI manslaughter and says those 8 were uninfluenced by the quote-unquote media circus. The burden of proof in a criminal case is much higher than a civil case. In a criminal trial, the defendant has to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a civil case, it just has to be more likely than not. The filing from Paul O'Keefe's lawyer brings up the cases of O.J. Simpson, pointing out that a jury didn't find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for the criminal, but he was found guilty in the wrongful death suit, with less of a burden of proof. They say that they want Karen on the stand. They want the jury to be able to hear her version of events and assess her credibility. They say that Karen has addressed the events publicly, saying that she wants to talk and is eager to provide her account of what happened. And they say that there's no shortage of reporters, bloggers, and persons claiming that Karen is actively speaking about the facts. The opposition then calls into question Karen's true intentions, claiming that if she were concerned about her statements being used against her, she wouldn't continue to speak out so openly. Then there's this paragraph. Quote, by actively participating in public discourse and potential profiting from media engagements, Reed effectively forgoes any claim of Fifth Amendment protection. Karen Reed's choice to speak out starkly contradicts any suggestion that she is concerned with self-incrimination. Now, Reed comes here asking this court to allow her to have it both ways. End quote. Like I said, seems to be some bitterness in this response. The attorney goes on to say that the O'Keefes have legitimate questions regarding witness and jury manipulation. And while the trial is scheduled for January, there's no guarantee that there won't be additional delays, another mistrial, a lengthy appeal, or other legal complications, extending the postponement of the civil proceedings. They request a timely resolution, reminding the court that the public are closely watching these proceedings and expect the court to take decisive action. Yikes. Karen's attorneys have requested a hearing on this, and there is currently a motions hearing scheduled for October 28th. Aside from the civil proceedings, there's also some pending decisions with the Supreme Judicial Court. Karen's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss counts 1 and 3, the murder charge and leaving the scene, after multiple jurors said that they all agreed unanimously that she was not guilty of those 2 charges. I told you before that Judge Kearney denied the motion for dismissal, and Karen's attorneys have asked the Supreme Judicial Court to reverse the order denying the dismissal. Justice DeWaar ruled that the appeal would be heard by the full panel of the Supreme Judicial Court, and the docket now shows that her case is ordered for argument on November 6th. The American Civil Liberties Union Foundation of Massachusetts has filed an amicus brief with the clerk as well. Amicus briefs are legal briefs filed in appellate courts by a person who isn't a party to the case, but they assist an appellate court by offering additional relevant information or arguments that the court may want to consider before they make their ruling. They are submitted in a specific case under review and essentially show the court that its final decision will impact people other than the parties. Amicus briefs are filed by people who typically take the position of one side in a case in the process of supporting a cause that has some bearing on the issues. Now, this can often be done because the outcome will set a precedent for future cases, which may be why they're choosing to file this now. Life recently has been insanely busy. Between attending trials, getting the podcast episodes written and recorded, doing interviews, sometimes it seems like I have so much to do, but it can be hard to focus enough to get it all done. I started using Magic Mind a while back, and it has been a game changer for me. It helps me to be way more efficient, it increases my mental performance, helps reduce my stress, and it keeps me focused. Magic Mind is a mental performance shot that you add to your daily routine. Along with the focus and reduced stress, it also helps to keep you mentally clear, motivated, and productive. Plus, it has over 100% of your daily vitamin C and D per bottle. It doesn't replace your coffee, so coffee lovers, no worries there. It's actually an addition to your morning routine, just like your daily essential vitamin, but for your mind. Plus, there's an ingredient in there that makes your coffee last all day. Created with a scientific advisory board of doctors and medical researchers, it's 100% carbon neutral, and they donate 5 cents for each bottle sold to mental health charities that help U.S. homeless communities. Also, there's no risk. They are confident in their product, so they'll refund it if you aren't happy. No questions asked for 100 days after buying. You have a limited offer that you can use now that gets you up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with code JUROR20 at checkout. You can claim it now at magicmind.com/juror20. We are only about 3 months away from the start date of the new trial against Karen Read. And as both sides gear up to present their case to another set of 12 jurors, some changes are being made this time around. In the last episode of Conspiracy in Canton, I went over some of those changes. Like there's a new prosecutor joining Lally and taking over as the lead for the Commonwealth. There's believed to be a new crash expert replacing Trooper Paul. And we have recently learned that there's also a new expert that the Commonwealth says believes may be able to recover some more data from Karen's Lexus SUV. On October 11th, the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office filed a notice of scheduling reassembly and testing of the defendant's Lexus telematics systems. So they intend to engage in further testing of the telematics because they believe that there is significant data that was not acquired during the chip-off procedure. Most likely because of what they refer to as a programmer's error, which they say is hardware and software utilized to acquire and interpret the data. Basically, they're saying that the software and the hardware that they had to get all of that information wasn't sufficient at the time. There was a search warrant for the infotainment and telematics modules from Karen's car on February 2nd of 2022. The Commonwealth later filed a motion in November of 2023 to permit destructive testing on the infotainment and telematics systems due to the means and methods required to retrieve the data. So basically, they have to get all of this through a process known as a chip-off. Here is Trooper Guarino during the trial explaining what that means.
As I said before, it is a destructive process. As soon as we do it, we take those memory chips off. It's applying extreme amounts of heat to the motherboards to take the memory off. That'll heat it. You lose a lot of the soldering and capacitors, anything that's on that motherboard. So, like I said, once the memory chips are taken off, it's going to destroy the board.
Guarino said that the chip-off was done in his presence with their expert, named AG Speak, and the defense expert. But he was told by Mr. Speak that there was no data that was recovered off the infotainment center or the telematics system. In the new filing, the prosecution says that the chip-off had the potential to be destructive, but in this case, the memory chips were apparently not destroyed, and they have been since secured in evidence along with the infotainment center, the telematics system, and the car itself. So, since the chip-off was done, there has been an updated version of Berla's IVE software, and the new expert believes that there is more data that they may be able to recover that they couldn't before. The infotainment module has a built-in diagnostic recorder that's designed to capture the vehicle's operational logs. So if the car has a navigation system, it can record geolocation data in the form of these track logs. The telematic logs can record start and stop points with time-based tracking. So Wi-Fi connections to the module can also be recorded, and the track logs are an ordered sequence. So it would be an ordered sequence of GPS coordinates and measurements, and they're stored by a satellite navigation system. But here's the thing, they're pretty specific, so they may be able to provide us with where the car was and at what time, including the time that they say that her car hit John O'Keefe. Prosecutors believe that the hardware and software that were used to retrieve the data at the time wasn't good enough. So they want to take these chips, reattach them to the board in the SUV, and use updated programming and current software versions to basically try again, see if they can get a more complete data acquisition. This testing is potentially destructive, so the filing says that they are giving notice to the defense so that they can have an expert present during these different stages of the testing if they choose to. The first stage of testing will be done in Texas, and then the stages after that will continue in Massachusetts. Prosecutors say that the testing could help prove or disprove their case ahead of the retrial, and they have requested a hearing within 14 days to get approval for this testing. It makes you wonder why all of these things could be recorded, but they weren't able to retrieve them. How is there software to record it, but not to retrieve and read it? Okay, look, this is not a language I speak. But I had to buy a new computer recently, and all I was told from the person who knows more about it than I do is that I needed at least 16 gigabytes of memory for it to do everything I needed for it to do. And I was given this whole speech about how gigabytes are more than 1,000 megabytes each, and that's important for storage, etc., etc. So when I'm looking at what they're saying they got versus what they're saying that they should have, I was thinking that is crazy. For example, the last one that they listed only gave them 264 megabytes, but it should have been around 2 gigabytes. 2 gigabytes is like 2,000 megabytes. So how did they only get 10% of the information from this thing? I Googled that long part number that they had listed, Just curious to see what I could find out, but with no idea what I was even looking for. Some Micron company website links popped up, and I found their flash memory part numbering system. That long number, the 29F2G08ABAEA, is actually broken down into different codes, and everything means something different. So the first part, the 29F, means that it's single supply NAND flash memory. The second part, 2G, is 2 gigabits, not gigabytes, gigabits. A gigabit isn't something that I know. I only know gigabytes and megabytes. So I look it up. 2 gigabits is the size of this particular flash memory. That is only about 250 megabytes, which makes sense since they got 264 megabytes of data from this thing. So then why does the Commonwealth think that it should have acquired 2 gigabytes of data? 2 gigabytes would be 16 gigabits, and this thing is only 2 gigabits. Am I missing something? So I look at the rest of the coding. 08 is the device width. 08 is for 8 bits. It's also available in 16-bit. A is the classification. B is the operating voltage range. For this one particularly, it's 1.65 to 1.95 volts. A is the feature set, and EA is the package code. So I can't help but wonder how the expert believes that there should have been that much more data when the part doesn't store that much. Is this an error? Did he confuse gigabytes with gigabits? I'm sure he didn't because he's an expert, right? But I guess if he did, we're not off to a great start here. The testing will be done and we'll see what comes of it. The more information, the better, and the closer we can get to the truth, which is always the goal. And finally, there has unfortunately been more Karen Read juror drama. In recent interviews with jurors, there has been some information that's come out that has made people question certain things with the mistrial and not turning in the acquittals for the 2 charges that the jury voted on and agreed on. When it was said that 2 of the jurors wanted to fill out the form and turn it in for the ones that they did agree on, they were told by the jury foreman that they couldn't do that they needed to have a unanimous decision on all 3 counts. That's not true, of course, but there's nothing that the other jurors could have done about it since the only one allowed to turn in the verdict forms or send the judge a note is the foreman. Now, to be clear, the jury foreman has no greater power than any of the other jurors. They only act as a vessel for communication between the group and the judge. Before deliberations, Judge Kearney specifically called this particular juror to be the foreman, which also fueled some of that speculation fire. There was a screenshot that was taken of the foreman's social media profile, and it included his name and his picture. The screenshot was posted on social media and began to spread, but with the names of the jurors impounded, there was no way to tell if it's just a rumor or not. That is, until it was confirmed by a person who was in the courtroom in the beginning of the trial. Now, I'm choosing not to give any of these names or which social media platform any of this is on because keeping their identities impounded is important. This juror telling coworkers that he was the foreman or talking about the case, that's his personal decision. But telling people that you know that you're the foreman is different than telling the world. The anger over the foreman doesn't end there, though. The person was a full-time police officer that was actually struck and injured by a vehicle while standing beside his cruiser. He was taken to the hospital and released the following day. The driver who hit him was not injured and also not charged. The juror is no longer an officer. He now works in the health field, but being an officer who was hit by a car by someone who didn't get charged raises some alarming questions on the ability to be objective. I'm sure we will hear more about this as things progress. I know that's a lot of updates, and these are all still issues and cases that are progressing, all while under the watchful eye of the world. In the next episode, we are going to have some major updates on Aidan Kearney, aka Turtleboy, and the bombshells that were dropped by his attorney, Mark Betterow. We're finding out that the Commonwealth attempted to bring more criminal charges against Karen Read and against Aidan Kearney, with Special Prosecutor Ken Mello from the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office asking a secret grand jury panel to indict them on allegations that they directly conspired to intimidate witnesses in the murder case. State police seized 2 phones from Karen Reed earlier this year during their investigation into these allegations, but the grand jury returned a no true bill, meaning there wasn't enough evidence to support the charges. Now, that says a lot because the process of a grand jury is all one-sided. They're only hearing the prosecution and the witnesses that the prosecution chooses, and the prosecutor can withhold any evidence that's favorable to the defendant. There's a former New York State Chief Judge named Sol Watchler who famously said, "Any good prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich." So the fact that they didn't think that there was enough evidence speaks volumes. That's not the only bombshell, though. Bettero has also filed to have Special Prosecutor Ken Mello removed from Kearney's case, saying that a phone extraction reveals that he and state police conspired with a former employee turned enemy of Kearney's to set up witness intimidation charges against him, and then deleted evidence. It gets wild. There's a lot more to this, and we are going to go over all of that and more on the next episode.
My name is Brandy Churchwell, creator of 13th Juror Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with your friends. For more information, photos, and episode guides, visit our website at 13thjurorpodcast.com.